The German officer held the small Bible against his chest, as if it were the last thing he owned. But when an American guard reached for it during inspection, the officer suddenly slammed his shoulder into the table and sent 3 mess tins crashing across the floor. The Bible fell open in the dirt. A thin strip of paper slid from the spine, and one prisoner near the fence tried to run before anyone could read the names written on it. The morning inspection at Camp Ashford was supposed to move quickly, because the new group of German prisoners had already been searched once at the rail station and once again at the gate. Sergeant Frank Wallace stood beside the processing table while prisoners placed watches, letters, wallets, pocket knives, and folded papers into marked trays. Most men obeyed without argument, but one officer near the end of the line kept one small black Bible pressed under his arm and shifted it from hand to hand every time the guards looked away. The officer's name was Captain Ernst Bauer, and he carried himself with the stiff calm of a man who expected others to move around him. When Wallace asked for the Bible, Bauer said it was personal property and held it tighter. The interpreter repeated the order, and Bauer answered that an American guard had no right to touch it. Wallace had heard that kind of pride before, yet something about Bauer's grip made him stop looking at the officer's face and start watching the book. A younger German prisoner behind Bauer whispered something too low for the interpreter to catch, and Bauer reacted instantly. He turned his head just enough to silence the man without speaking. Wallace noticed the movement, then ordered the younger prisoner pulled aside before the line could continue. Bauer stepped forward as if to block the view, and that was when Wallace reached for the Bible. Bauer drove his shoulder into the table hard enough to scatter mess tins, pencils and property cards across the floor. Several prisoners lurched backward. 2 guards reached for him, and the Bible slipped from his hand as he twisted away. It struck the dirt beside the table, opened near the spine, and a narrow paper strip slid out from beneath loosened binding cloth. The younger prisoner, who had whispered, suddenly broke from the line and ran toward the fence. The yard exploded into motion. Guards chased the runner. Bauer tried to step on the paper strip, and Wallace threw himself forward before the officer's boot came down. He snatched the strip from the dirt and rolled away, as another guard dragged Bauer back by the shoulders. The runner was caught near the wire, not escaping the camp, but reaching toward a drainage grate where something had been hidden under loose gravel. Wallace ordered both men separated and the yard frozen. The paper strip looked harmless at first, nothing more than a thin column of initials and numbers written in tight pencil marks. Then the interpreter read the first full name, and the American lieutenant beside Wallace went still. The name belonged to a missing American, airman whose transfer records had vanished weeks earlier during a prisoner movement from Europe. Bauer claimed the paper was a prayer list and said the Americans were insulting a sacred object. Wallace did not answer the accusation. He opened the Bible carefully, not tearing the pages, and found the spine had been hollowed with a blade. Inside the narrow gap was room for more than one strip of paper, but the rest had already been removed. The Bible was no longer a personal possession. It was a courier case. The initial conflict became clear when the younger prisoner, Klaus Weber, finally spoke. He said Bauer had forced selected prisoners to carry names through camps by hiding them inside religious books, coat seams, and food wrappers. He also said the strip from the Bible was incomplete, because Bauer had passed the other pieces to men already assigned to different barracks. Wallace looked across the yard and saw 3 prisoners lowering their eyes at the same time, and the simple inspection became a race to find the rest before the names disappeared again. Wallace ordered every barrack searched, but he did not allow the guards to storm in blindly. He divided the camp into sections, sent 2 guards with each interpreter, and moved Bauer to a chair near the processing table where he could see every search team leave. Bauer watched the first group enter Barrack 2, then looked toward the laundry shed for less than a second. Wallace caught the glance and sent his best corporal there instead of following the obvious route. the laundry shed produced the first hidden piece. A guard lifted a stack of folded blankets and found a torn page tucked into a seam that had been resewn with darker thread. The writing matched the strip from the Bible, but the names were different. Each line carried a number, a camp location, and a small mark beside it. Klaus Weber identified the marks as transfer signals, used to show which men had already been moved and which were still inside the camp system. The escalation became sharper when the barrack search found nothing except frightened men and empty footlockers. Bauer smiled as the first team returned, because the obvious hiding places had been prepared to waste time. Wallace changed the pattern immediately. He ordered every routine object checked instead of every personal object, including bread baskets, chapel benches, stovepipes, and laundry hooks. If Bauer's network had survived searches before, it had done so by hiding inside things guards stopped noticing. Inside the chapel bench, they found a second strip, rolled into the hollow end of a wooden peg. The interpreter read the numbers aloud, and one American clerk matched them to prisoner intake files. The names were not only American. Some belonged to German prisoners who had cooperated with Allied doctors or translators. Bauer had been tracking men from both sides, and the list was not a prayer list, a memory list, or a private record. It was a control system. Bauer tried to regain power by accusing Klaus of stealing from fellow prisoners and inventing the story to save himself. The accusation nearly worked, because several German prisoners began shouting that Klaus was a liar. Wallace responded by bringing Klaus to the evidence table, placing him between two guards, and ordering him to identify one hiding place no guard had found yet. Klaus pointed toward the kitchen water barrel, then lowered his head as if expecting Bauer's men to move. A cookhouse search found a waxed packet tied beneath the barrel rim, dry despite the water sloshing above it. Inside were 3 more strips and a tiny map of the camp yard. One red circle marked the drainage grate where Klaus had tried to run. Wallace sent 2 guards to open the grate, and beneath it they found a small metal tube wrapped in cloth. The tube was empty, but its inside smelled of pencil wax and damp paper. The missing contents had already been moved. That discovery pushed the escalation into the prisoner line itself. Wallace ordered a second count and noticed one German medical orderly absent from the infirmary group. The orderly was found behind the tool shed, with his sleeve torn open, and a page fragment hidden beneath a bandage wrap. He claimed Bauer had ordered him to carry it, but before he could explain further, another prisoner threw a stone from the crowd and struck him near the shoulder. The guards pulled the orderly behind the table, and Wallace ordered Bauer's suspected followers moved to a separate pen. The camp was now split between witnesses, carriers, and men trying to bury the paper trail. By late afternoon, the Bible, the laundry strip, the chapel strip, the water barrel packet, and the torn bandage fragment lay side by side on the table. The escalation had uncovered a network, but the most important piece was still missing, because the numbers showed one final strip had been removed before the inspection began. The major consequence began when the American records clerk matched 3 names from the recovered strips to men who were officially listed as transferred, even though no arrival camp had recorded them. Wallace ordered every file pulled from the temporary records office, and within an hour the problem grew far beyond Bauer's Bible. At least 9 names appeared in American paperwork as moved, but the German list marked them with a symbol Klaus described as held back. That meant men had disappeared inside the confusion of transport, not outside it. Wallace ordered the rail intake logs reviewed, the truck manifests checked, and the previous camp's property bags opened again. The first property bag contained a cracked pair of spectacles and a letter that had never been mailed. The second contained an American dog tag wrapped inside a German newspaper. The third contained nothing but a blank card with Bauer's initials written in the corner. The consequence: hit the camp when one of the missing names was recognized by a U.S. medic. The man had been alive at the rail, Stationed 2 days earlier, feverish but walking, and he had been loaded onto the same truck as Bauer. The medic remembered because Bauer had argued with him near the vehicle, claiming the sick man belonged with German officers rather than hospital prisoners. Wallace realized Bauer had not merely carried names. He had influenced where men were placed. Klaus then revealed what the final strip likely contained. He said Bauer kept a master list of men who could identify false transfers, stolen tags, or prisoner punishments carried out before surrender. The final strip did not travel with ordinary carriers. It was kept close, passed only when Bauer believed inspection was coming. Wallace looked back at the Bible and saw a faint glue stain on the inside cover, where a second pocket had been peeled away. The search shifted from objects to movement. Wallace ordered every prisoner who had stood within arm's reach of Bauer during processing placed in a separate row. One older officer protested that the Americans were creating panic, but Wallace ignored him and asked each man to empty his boots, belt lining, and cap band onto the table. The fourth man produced nothing, yet his cap felt heavier than it should. Inside the cap band was a strip of oiled paper, but it was not the master list. It was a warning written in Bauer's hand, telling carriers to destroy the final page if the Bible was found. The American lieutenant ordered Bauer searched again, this time by 2 men who checked every seam in his coat, every fold in his collar, and every page of the Bible under direct light. Bauer stood still, but his eyes moved toward the prisoner latrine. The latrine search found the consequence Bauer had feared. A loose board behind the wash trough opened into a gap between the wall and floor, and inside sat a small packet wrapped in black cloth. Wallace carried it outside before opening it, and the first page revealed the master list. It held names, dates, transfer numbers, and marks showing which men had been removed from official counts while still alive. The camp changed when the master list was read. German witnesses began asking whether their friends were marked. American officers demanded immediate confirmation from nearby holding sites, and Bauer's controlled silence lost its force. The consequence was no longer a hidden Bible or smuggled paper strips. It was proof that the prison transport system had been manipulated by men who understood paperwork well enough to make living prisoners disappear on paper before anyone thought to search for them. The major reversal came after sunset, when Klaus Weber admitted that he had not tried to run toward the drainage grate to recover evidence. He had tried to stop another carrier from taking the final tube out of the camp. Wallace had believed Klaus was only a frightened witness, but the confession revealed that Klaus had once been part of Bauer's courier system before turning against it. That changed the entire shape of the case. Klaus explained that Bauer never trusted one Bible, one carrier, or one hiding place. The Bible was meant to be found if things went wrong, because it held enough information to distract guards from the real channel. The real channel moved through camp mailbags, laundry carts, and kitchen waste buckets that left the inner yard every evening. Wallace realized the Bible had not been the center of the system. It had been the alarm bell. The reversal forced immediate action. The evening waste cart had already left the inner yard and was being pushed toward the disposal trench beyond the fence. Wallace sent 2 guards running after it, while the lieutenant ordered the gate held open. The cart stopped near the trench, and one prisoner worker tried to tip it before the guards arrived. They seized the handles, pulled the top layer aside, and found a sealed tin hidden under vegetable scraps. Inside the tin was a fresh list written that afternoon after the Bible had been found. Bauer had used the chaos of the inspection to create a new record, marking Klaus, the medical orderly, and 2 American clerks as threats. The reversal was now complete. Bauer was not only protecting an old secret, he was updating the system in real time while under guard, using men still loyal to him inside the yard. Wallace ordered a controlled message sent through the same channel. Instead of stopping the cart route, he allowed the next expected signal to leave under surveillance. with a false mark added to suggest the final page had been moved to the old coal shed. At midnight, 2 prisoners crossed the yard toward that shed, not to retrieve the page, but to set fire to it. Guards captured them before they reached the door, and both carried wax paper identical to the Bible strips. One captured carrier broke under questioning and named the outside contact. It was not a German officer, not a hidden civilian agent, and not a guard from another camp. It was a prisoner clerk working in the American Records Office, a man trusted because he translated names and numbers faster than anyone else. He had been altering spellings, shifting digits, and delaying confirmations long enough for Bauer's lists to outrun official files. The clerk was taken from the records office while still holding a pencil. His desk contained no dramatic treasure, only tiny changes that could bury a man inside bureaucracy. 1 wrong digit, 1 missing middle initial, 1 altered transfer date. Wallace placed the Bible beside the records ledger and understood the reversal clearly. The most dangerous hiding place had not been the book. It had been the paperwork everyone believed was neutral. By dawn, Bauer's network had reversed from invisible power into exposed machinery. The Bible, the waste cart, the wax strips, the altered records, and the clerk's corrections formed one chain. Klaus had not simply betrayed Bauer. He had shown the Americans that the system was still alive after discovery, still adapting, and still capable of making more men vanish unless every record was rebuilt from the ground up. The final irreversible event began with a full public recount of every prisoner connected to Bauer's lists. Wallace ordered tables placed across the yard, with 1 line for names, 1 line for property, 1 line for medical condition, and 1 line for transfer history. The German prisoners were marched through slowly, not as punishment, but as living proof against the altered records. Each man spoke his name, while an American clerk checked it against the recovered master list. Bauer was forced to sit facing the tables with 2 guards beside him. He did not look at Klaus, but every corrected name made his old system weaker. Men who had been marked as moved were found in the camp. Men marked as silent witnesses stepped forward. Men whose initials had been changed recovered their full names before the American recorders. The Bible's hidden paper had opened a process Bauer could no longer control. The final danger came when the prisoner clerk tried to destroy the updated ledger during the recount. He asked for water, stumbled near the records table, and swept 1 elbow toward an open ink bottle. Wallace caught the movement and pulled the ledger away before the ink spread. The clerk was seized, and in his pocket guards found 1 last prepared slip, with new altered spellings ready to be inserted after the count. That attempt ended any doubt about the need for a permanent correction. The lieutenant ordered all recovered strips photographed, copied, and sealed in duplicate packets. 1 packet would stay at the camp. 1 would be sent to regional command. The names would no longer depend on a single ledger, a single clerk, or a single witness. Bauer's weapon had been fragmentation, and the Americans answered by multiplying the truth. Klaus was brought forward last. The German prisoners watched him pass the tables, expecting Bauer's followers to curse him. But the first man to speak was the medical orderly, whose hidden bandage strip had been recovered earlier. He gave his own corrected name, then pointed to Klaus and said the list would still be moving if Klaus had not run. The yard shifted in that moment, because the man Bauer had used as a carrier had become the witness who stopped the system. Wallace then opened the Bible 1 final time under the inspection lamp. He did not mock it, tear it, or display it as a trophy. He placed a thin evidence tag inside the hollow spine and closed the cover carefully. The object that Bauer had used to hide names would now preserve the proof that names had been hidden. Its meaning had changed hands without a speech. Bauer made 1 last attempt at dignity by saying the Americans had found only paper. Wallace answered by pointing to the men standing in the corrected line. The paper mattered because the men were alive and because someone had tried to make records say otherwise. Bauer had no answer that could survive the yard, the witnesses, the recovered strips, and the duplicated ledger. By evening, the corrected records were nailed to the camp office board, and every man named on Bauer's list was moved under verified status. The final irreversible event was not the discovery inside the Bible. It was the rebuilding of the record in public, where altered names became full names again, missing men became living witnesses, and a hidden system of control collapsed under the weight of men saying who they were. When the yard emptied, Wallace remained at the table and watched the evidence clerk seal the Bible in a canvas packet. Klaus stood nearby with his corrected name card in his hand, while Bauer was escorted away from the officer line he had once controlled. The book looked small after everything it had opened, but the hollow spine had changed the camp. It had revealed that a name could be stolen without a body disappearing, and that restoring it could be the most powerful act in the whole yard.